We want to be the largest outside shareholders in the most important companies of tomorrow. We don't necessarily need to be the first investor in every single company, but we should be the longest term investor, scaling up with them and compounding. That's like the business that we want to be in.
Very blue today. I love it. You're
Cool.
really owning it, end to end. You're verticalizing blue. It's great.
Good intro.
How did you end up at Sequoia? You started as an analyst at Goldman. How did you transition into venture? Was it something you always wanted to do?
I started my career at Goldman Sachs, where they have the blue background profile pictures as the originators of that. Spent 18 months at Goldman and left to join Sequoia. It was a very interesting time to be entering the VC world. I think for those of us who were fortunate enough to enter at that time, you sort of had a few years of earning your stripes and learning, and by the time you were able to start doing your own investments, you still had many years of this like big cloud wave ahead of you, and you caught the tail end of mobile.
Did you have any self-doubt like in the early days prior to this like absolutely generational run?
I think I was the first person at Sequoia to actually tweet. It was like, this was my, in the origins, this is probably 2017. I remember thinking, I started in 2014 and, I was doing well. I'd sourced some investments. I'd helped out on things. GitHub we did in 2015. The company was acquired in 2017. So I felt like I kind of gotten my feet underneath me, but then I imagined, imagine you are a founder and you are, invited into Sequoia and you have your pick of Mike, Doug, Roelof, Jim, Pat, Alfred, why would anyone ever choose to work with me? I was 27 and I was like, well, like the one thing I do have is like, I think I'm reasonably likable. I have a pretty good sense of humor and I am, I guess, less self-conscious than many people as it relates to, the internet. So I started, with my 14 followers. So I'll make some jokes on the internet. And it felt so countercultural at the time, because I think this is kind of before VC was not yet as online as it is now. I think the pandemic was sort of a, like the Clubhouse era pandemic, last dance tweeting phase of venture was, I think, a bit of a paradigm shift. Anyway, so the origins of that was like, how can I possibly, be like relevant to founders? And, the internet is a fairly open playing field where if, your profile picture is pixelated enough, no one really knows how old you are, right? And so then the first investment that I was like truly led for Sequoia was Robinhood in 2017.
What's your approach to working on boards sort of broadly?
Every good board is the same, and every bad board is bad in its own unique and unhappy way. No, I think like in general, a paint by numbers approach to anything in technology and anything in investing is bad. And I think the worst board members tend to try to be the people who come in and take the reins and run that company through their playbook, because playbooks age very quickly, especially in a world of accelerating change. So I think the first thing you have to do when you join a board is just take the time to learn what business you're actually in. And I think this is one thing that I've found is you can get to a pretty good sense of a company and its market, at the end of your diligence process when you're writing the memo, but you haven't seen the people in that company respond to adverse events. You haven't seen what the real bottlenecks in the business are. And you can have opinions, but you sort of, it's much more easy to feel those opinions when you have dollars at risk. So I think in general, the first thing I try to do is like, just figure out what business we're actually in and where the bottlenecks actually are. I think one thing I like to do pretty soon after leading an investment is do an executive search with the founder. I think it's like a very nice way to get from the opposite sides of the table when you're negotiating an investment. The first thing you want to do is make sure you feel like you're on the same side of the table and, go on the same side of the table and grinding a recruiter on how many leads we have in the funnel for our VP of engineering search is like a great way to align. And then there's this concept that Ruloff talks about a lot of being a shock absorber on the board, which is something that I really, really believe in. You know, when things are going well, many board members love to do the rah-rah cheerleading board meetings. And, you know, one of the nice things about being at Sequoia is, you know, in the portfolio review, if you're beating your number, but your page is next to the whiz, you know, financials, like, you know, it's like, okay, you know, there's levels to this. And I think it's helpful to remind the best companies, you know, that there are like, you know, there are current generation companies that are performing even better than this, and here's what they're doing. And then similarly, when things are going poorly, you know, and poorly is almost always relative, right? But, you know, you can have a company that in a vacuum is doing amazing, but you come in at 80% of plan and everyone's ho-hum in the board meeting. You know, it's like, oh, and then we need to change our strategy. We need to change this executive. We need to, as always, we need to fire the VP of sales. Like, you know, I think oftentimes the best thing you can do is just like cause everyone to take a deep breath. Yeah, we're actually in decent shape. We have a lot of runway. You know, look at these metrics. Here's what's going well. You know, it's probably not a VP of sales thing. It's probably a product thing. You know, that sort of work is good. And then every now and then, maybe once every 2 years, you have a major thing you got to deal with.
Can you talk a little bit about the importance of concentration? I feel like just observing from the outside, the Sequoia playbook has basically been like find the power law winner in whatever market, but then also get the most concentration and the highest ownership percentages. Has that been something that's been kind of a drumbeat internally?
You know, our North Star, we want to be the largest outside shareholders in the most important companies of tomorrow. And it would be amazing if we were the seed investor in every single most important company of tomorrow. And we actually do a decent job of that. And if we don't do the seed, we try to do the Series A. If we do the seed, we'll often try to do the Series A. And at any given round, you know, there's a relative risk reward, and also, like, you know, we can't forget that we're in the, you know, net multiple of money business, right? We're focused on investment returns, and if, you know, being the fourth biggest investor of the most important company is a good investment, we'll do that too. But I think the ability to double down and triple down on companies that we really believe in and hold them for the long term, like, you know, we don't necessarily need to be the first investor in every single company, but we should be the longest term investor. And for the really special companies, scaling up with them and compounding, you know, that's like the business that we want to be in. To me, the lesson is just like always try to do business with good people and trustworthy people, and, you know, try to find front stabbers, not backstabbers, is a good rule of thumb. And, you know, like, if you do that, by and large, people are like good and ethical in the Valley. Like, it's a pay it forward place. It's a repeat game. I think there's a reason why a lot of the, you know, bad behavior comes from people who aren't from Silicon Valley. You know, it's like, yeah, it's actually a wonderful place to do business in that way. But Sequoia, you know, we are as cutthroat as it gets, right? Like we are front stabbers. You know, we'll like, we don't hide that in general we want to do usually as much of a round as we possibly can. We'll, you know, tell you what we're willing to pay. You know, we're not, you know, externally necessarily with investment banks or with search firms known for being like the easiest group to deal with. But here's all I hear often, like, oh, Sequoia, I've heard is really tough internally, like really sharp elbowed. And I mean, the stakes are really high. It's a small team. Expectations on performance are insane, right?
And
like,
it's a consensus. It's a consensus investment process as well, where you don't need to just basically close you. You got to close. If you're an entrepreneur, you got to close all your partners, correct?
Yeah, exactly. And the partner meeting, there's like, you know, I've seen founders, you know, some founders really rise to the occasion in the Sequoia partner meeting room. I've seen people just totally wilt. But it's an amazing, like, it's actually an amazing culture inside the building because of that. I think, like, because the expectations are so high and the team is so small, right? I think, like, this is one of the things that, you know, Doug has this presentation. He calls it the laws of physics, where one of the laws of physics is that fund returns are inversely proportional to team size, and also fund returns inversely proportional to fund size. We've been very disciplined about keeping the number of people on the team and keeping the funds to like a relatively stable size, and then working together to kick ass. That's clear.
Can you talk a little bit about paths to venture? You mentioned that in your analyst class, there was the high startups, maxed out on startups versus maxed out on finance. Are both of those paths still viable today, or have they shifted over time? How do you think about hiring new people?
It sort of doesn't matter at all what you did before, because nothing you do before joining a venture capital firm prepares you for how truly like multifaceted long-term success is in venture. Like you can divide the job into, sourcing, picking, winning, and company building. Like those are probably the four core competencies. And what we try to do, or at least what I try to do, is I want to find somebody who can really hit the ground running on one of those things. So with finance, you'll have people who come in and they can be really good on the picking, like the investment process, due diligence, have a real point of view on why a company should succeed. But maybe you've never taken a meeting before one-on-one with anybody in your life. That was me. Like when I joined Sequoia at Goldman, I was the headphones on behind the Excel sheet. Like that was, I literally had never done a one-on-one meeting before in my life. And I got to Sequoia, I turned to Doug and I said, Doug, like, is there like a sector you want me to cover? And Doug looks over and he goes, what? That's what we hired you for. I said, like, noted. So I like to find somebody who can hit the ground running on one of those things, but clearly has like the potential to max out on all of them if given enough time. Yeah. And then we just really try to invest in young people and give them opportunities to try things and take meetings and sponsor investments. And, if you look at a lot of the people at Sequoia started in the early 20s here and apprenticed, were nobodies for 5-6 years. And then all of a sudden people started recognizing them when they had, amazing portfolios. And that's sort of what we try to do.
Last big question I have for you. How do you think about underwriting generative AI investments today?
It's it's the most transformative, it's the most interesting time in technology that I could possibly imagine. I actually think moments like today on the internet, when you have the giblification of all of the last 5 years of memes happening at once, it's like a nice reminder of this, unlike prior technology waves, which were, distribution extending waves where a small group of people had this at first, now 1 billion people have access to ChatGPT and are logging on and doing the same thing. It turns out we have like a zillion computers in Virginia just making cartoon memes today, which is, it's like a small power plant being burned. It's like
these are coal-powered memes, everybody.
For good purpose.
Another one of these? Are you sure? We can do so much. So it's amazing, but because of that fact, everybody is on the internet all the time, and most of these technologies are available at the get-go to everybody. You can see revenue ramps like nothing we've ever seen before, right? Because it's transformative technology with full distribution from the get-go. And some of that will certainly be easy come, easy go revenue. I think some of it certainly won't. It makes each individual investment decision nuanced and complex in its own way. I think the important thing is going back to that law of physics presentation that Doug gave when I first got to Sequoia. There are some things that never change in business, and there are some things that change all the time. And I think the important thing is knowing which one's which.
That's powerful.
To end it. I love
Powerful.
it. I can see why you closed so many deals. You're great.
You closed us.
Yeah.
Great having you on.
This was fantastic.
Yeah, thanks guys. Thanks for having me.
Awesome.
This is great.
Take care.
Talk to you soon.
Cheers.